Hi there, we're finally at Unit 3 and we're going to talk about course competencies. So prior to watching this video, I want you to go ahead and look at all of the material in Unit 3 and complete those learning activities to help get you up to speed on what a competency is and how they're related, how they're defined within our course. This video will give you the big picture overview about course competencies. Okay, so what is a competency? A competency is a major skill, knowledge, or attitude that is measurable and observable. So you want to kind of memorize this, that we're using a competency to assess a student's mastery in a course, and that competency needs to be a skill, knowledge, or attitude that is measurable and observable. Okay, sometimes as instructors, we think this is really obvious. We know what we want our students to be able to do by the time they reach the end of the course, but it's harder than you might think to state that in a way that's very clear and obvious to a student. We want to be able to share our course competencies within our syllabus so that before the student even begins, they know what they'll be expected to achieve by the end of the course. That way they can even select the proper course and know if they're ready to proceed down the path that we have outlined in our course. Okay, so how do course competencies fit into what we've already learned? Do you remember in Chapter 2 we talked about exit learning outcomes? Our course competencies help us to meet each of those three buckets in the exit learning outcomes. And for each competency, we'll identify criteria that states exactly how we're going to grade or score a student on mastery of that competency. So I want you to take a look at your course outline. In your course outline, you should be able to identify each of the course competencies that are listed. Each course competency should have associated with it an assessment strategy, and then underneath the assessment strategy should be listed the criteria by which students will be judged, again, on their mastery of that competency. As you review your course outlines, sometimes outlines haven't been updated in a while, so you want to make sure and ask yourself, are these competencies relevant to how the course is being taught today? Okay, let's take a look at some examples. Here's an example from culinary arts. Perhaps they might have for their baking students a competency like bake chocolate chip cookies. Okay, so notice that the competency starts with a verb. Each one of your competencies must always start with a verb. And then notice how it clearly states the skill, the bake, that is observable and measurable, right? This baking is not, it's observable and measurable. Okay, so here's our assessment strategy. We have chosen for this competencies that students will be assessed by a skill demonstration in the lab. So they're going to be down in the kitchen baking these cookies, making and baking these cookies. And here are our criteria. Right, because you might, so a student could see that given competency, bake chocolate chip cookies, and wonder, well, how will I know when I have met the competency? Does it just mean that my cookies taste good? Nope, it's more than that. The criteria are that the student has followed all safety and sanitation guidelines, that the cookie is a certain size, right? These students aren't learning home baking skills. They're learning baking skills to be out there in bakeries and restaurants, right? So they learn standardization like cookie size, number of chocolate chips, so on and so forth. All right, let's take a look at another example. This example, the competency is label forensic evidence. The assessment strategy is again skill demonstration in the lab. So students in the lab will be labeling the forensic evidence and the instructor will be assessing them as they perform this in the lab. Okay, so, and then again, we have the criteria listed that show us when a student has done good enough to show mastery of that competency. And again, looking at that competency, we start with a verb. It is a skill that is measurable and observable. Our last one, our competency is perform computation with radical functions. So this comes to us from the math department. So again, it starts with a verb. That the observable and measurable part are tied to the criteria here, right? So we're asking the student to define, to determine, to solve. That's the observable and measurable part. Notice the assessment strategy chosen for this one. It's a written test that the student has to complete. Okay, now it's time for you to take a look at, oh, sorry, not just yet. Before you get to your outline of instruction, when you're reviewing the material in Chapter 3, the documents will relate to Bloom's taxonomy. That's what we're showing you on the screen here, is the steps related, or the ladder. Sometimes it's referred to as a ladder in Bloom's taxonomy. The verb that we choose for our course competencies need to be at the applying level or above. So choosing the right verb really is a matter of just sort of looking at all of the verbs listed, determining the category, the step that you want to be at, looking at the verbs that are listed, and choosing the one that is most applicable to what you're asking your students to demonstrate, to perform there with that competency. So make sure when you're choosing your verb that it's at the applying level or above. Okay, now it's time for you to get your hands in there and try your best at the competency practice, and then taking a look at your own course competencies and making sure that they're developed to their best ability. If you have any questions at all, you can email me at any time.